Hello, this is a brief introduction and overview of what is going to be a 10-week class in which we will examine and study together the life and letters of St. Paul. You will have, I hope, before the first class, the syllabus of the 10 weeks, a reading list, and some beginning pages of materials that we will use during the first class. What I'd like to do right now is just to explain what we are going to do and to give you the opportunity to make certain that you understand the way the YouTube channels work, which is also something I am learning myself. And so we'll be ready when the course begins. What we are going to do in these 10 weeks is to try to approach the project of coming to know St. Paul both as a person and as a theological teacher, as well as we can given the materials that survive for us to study. So in the first class we are going to take a look at the question of how we can know things about St. Paul, what it is that we actually do know, and how we can draw from this knowledge an outline of the chronological development of his life in the church as a Christian minister. It's important to do this for a number of reasons. One of them is that St. Paul leaves behind him more words in the New Testament than any other Christian except for St. Luke with the Gospel and Acts. And much more so than St. Luke, who only very rarely and very briefly appears in his own works. St. Paul is the only Christian of the first generation, if it's fair to call him the first generation, which I think it is, whom we can know to a relatively large degree as an individual person. Even someone like Peter, who is represented more fully than other disciples in the Gospels, is really not known to us as an individual. The places in which he appears and the things that he does are all clearly uncharacteristic of what St. Peter or anyone else did. St. Paul's life, as a missionary at least, is presented to us much more fully so that we have much more of an idea of how it actually worked and what it may have been like for him to engage in that change of life, in that process of leaving behind him the kind of Jew he had been before and trying to be the kind of Jew he felt that he was called to be afterwards, which was, of course, a Messianic Jew. We want to make a firm distinction between what we know and what we suspect, what we are actually told or shown, and what we think we can draw from that. Those are very different things, right? Knowledge is certainty, and even very clear deductions are things that may be dependable, but they are not certain. And it is very important always to make a firm distinction between these things. If you are going to study Scripture yourself, or if you're going to teach Scripture to other people, you always have to keep very clear the distinction between these things in your own mind and also in the minds of the people you were teaching. It's one of the most important things that teachers in the church can do, is to teach Christian people how to be critical students of Scripture. By critical, I do not mean saying bad things about it. I mean making judgments. Critical is a Greek word. It means involving judgment. A crisis, by the way, in Greek is a judgment. So a moment of crisis is not a moment when everything's terrible. It's a moment when something is decided. You're either going to go, at the moment of crisis, you're either going to start the American Revolution or you're not. You're either going to go over the Niagara Falls in a barrel or you're not. So it certainly can be a bad thing depending on what happens, but it's not necessarily. So that's the first class. We're going to try to get ourselves organized, and that's a very important thing. Talk a little bit about how we're going to do this study. Then after that, we are going to work our way through for 8 weeks through the letters of St. Paul in the order in which F. Bruce in his book Paul, Apostle of the Heart Set Free, which is the book that I'm suggesting you all read, the order in which he places them. There are a number of different possible orders in which one can place the letters. We're going to talk about that as we go along and also at the beginning. More than one way makes sense, and that's true because these things are uncertain. We cannot know for sure that F. Bruce is right. I am not sure that F. Bruce is right. F. Bruce was a very good scholar, and I am certain, because I've read his stuff, that he wasn't sure that he was right either. But if someone gives you the task of writing a book on Paul, you have to make decisions, and so you make the best ones you can. But that doesn't mean that he thinks that he solved and sorted all of the things that need to be solved and sorted in a study of the life of Paul. I do not think it is possible at this point for anyone to do that. We do not have enough information, and we do not have the right kind of information to do that. Very few of the letters of Paul can be actually dated. We'll talk about that as we go along. Because of that, we really cannot put them all in order because we have too few fixed points. But we will use his order, because you have to use some order. You can't do things at the same time, because we are limited creatures living in time and space. So over the 10 weeks of the class, I will be in this space at certain times, and we will work our way through the material. After 8 weeks of that, we are going to try to sum up for ourselves what we think we have seen as far as St. Paul's teaching is concerned. Now, as Western Christians, Latin language Christians, St. Paul is a very different figure for us than he is for the Christians of the East or of the Orient, which is how people politely call the Armenians and Syrians and Indians and things like that, whose churches go all the way back to the very beginning, by the way, older than Anglicanism. Just as a note, it is within 10 years of the arrival of Augustine at Canterbury that an official Christian delegation is received at the Chinese court in Xi'an. So Christianity gets all the way across Asia in the same time it takes it to get back into Britain to start its permanent life there. More about that sometime in church history, but that's an important thing to know. So these other traditions are not younger than ours. They're not necessarily older than ours, but they also go back to the very beginning. And St. Paul for us is a bone of contention, both in the wake of St. Augustine, who may have done many great things, but also to a certain degree messed up the theological mind of Western culture, at least, not so much the church, with his grace and faith difficulties because of his own biography, and of course his ideas about sexual relations are also problematic, as we say, to say the least. And later, of course, in the Reformation, this comes to a head again. Both sides in the Reformation trying to be fully Augustinian and trying to kind of out St. Augustine each other. These problems come to the fore again, and Christians of both Catholic and Protestant traditions, and Anglicans are in some important ways both Catholic and Protestant as far as theology goes. We live with these problems still. One of the things we want to do when we study St. Paul, certainly when we teach St. Paul, is to be self-consciously aware that the project requires us not to find in St. Paul what we expect to see there, being created in a certain mold in our minds by our culture as much as by the church, but rather what he actually says. So we are going to work through the letters of Paul, trying to understand them as well as we can, given what we know about their times and places, backgrounds, and circumstances. And then from each writing that we examine, we are going to try to draw out the essential general teachings that can be more broadly used and more widely, and not necessarily always, but more widely applied, and see, after we have worked our way through all of the letters, what those add up to. It's important to understand from the beginning, having read the letters of Paul, I can tell you this, that there is not enough in the letters of Paul to yield to us a complete outline of Christian doctrine, either at our time or at his. He does not deal with the totality of Christian teaching. Of course, his letters are occasional pieces. They're written at particular times and places for particular purposes. They're not general reflections. It's not a systematic theology like St. Thomas, who died before he could finish his big Summa, but was trying to write a summary of Christian doctrine, getting in everything. That's not what St. Paul is trying to do in the letters that survive for us. For all we know, he wrote an 18-volume one that he left on his shelf, and the landlady threw it out after he was executed. We have no record of it at all. But there is no trace of that in the letters that we do have. And so we cannot turn St. Paul into St. Thomas. We need to read him as he is and understand him as he comes to us. And that's the task for the 10th class. If we can do that, then we will at least once over lightly, and you can spend your whole life doing this, and smarter people than I will ever be have spent their lifetimes doing this, and still not, solve the kind of St. Paul problem. But we will be at least a group who have taken a first intelligent step forward in our effort to understand St. Paul, what he's really up to, and what he offers us, both as an example of Christian discipleship, which is very important, but also as a teacher of Christian doctrine, and someone who experiences the power and grace of God in his life, which is always the primary thing for a Christian to have an understanding of and try to make real in his life. So, with that as an introduction, I look forward to our first class. I am going to upload this introduction to YouTube. Now it's early February, 2 months and more ahead of when we begin our classes, so that it will be there, and those of you who are interested in this can find it when the information goes out and see that you are ready to watch these videos as they arrive, and so participate in the class. I look forward to being in contact with all of you as we go forward, and we will be emailing back and forth. Right now, I'm not being so good about email of late because we're doing things like getting a new furnace, so our lives here are kind of torn up. But I will hope to be better in the future, and when the class gets going, I hope to be more organized about that too. Thank you all for tuning in, and I will see you soon.